Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. In Afghanistan, at least 11 civilians have been killed in a roadside bomb blast in Bulletin province. The provincial governor says the women and children are also among those killed. Meanwhile, the Taliban claim to have killed several soldiers and captured 5 districts in various parts of the country. Fighting in Afghanistan has raged amid withdrawal of the US and NATO troops. In Myanmar, security forces have killed 20 people after armed villagers clashed with troops in the Ayeyarwady Delta region. This is the heaviest death toll in nearly 2 months as the army struggles to quell resistance against the coup. Nearly 850 people have been killed in the crackdown since February the 1st. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says rich countries didn't pay due attention to global warming. He was addressing a ceremony in Islamabad as the country hosts this year's World Environment Day. The Prime Minister urged the developed world to support those countries vulnerable to climate change. He also highlighted Pakistan's contributions in tackling the issue and pledged to plant 10 billion trees. The G7 group of leading economies has reached a historic deal on taxing multinational companies. At a meeting in London, finance ministers agreed to commit to a global minimum tax rate of 15%. The move could see billions of dollars flow to governments. It will help countries pay off debts incurred during the COVID-19 crisis. China has approved a nebulized inhalable COVID-19 vaccine for expanded clinical trials. Meanwhile, in India, the virus has claimed nearly 3,400 lives and infected more than 120,000 people in the past 24 hours. In Pakistan, 84 people have lost their lives to the coronavirus and over 1,900 tested positive overnight. Globally, more than 3.7 million people have died from the coronavirus and over 172 million have been infected so far. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. In Afghanistan, at least 11 civilians have been killed in a roadside bomb blast in Bulletin province. The provincial governor says women and children are among those killed. Violence in Afghanistan has surged in recent months amid the withdrawal of the US and NATO troops. At least 20 security personnel have reportedly been killed in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, the Taliban claim to have captured 5 districts in various parts of the country. A UN report warned that the group has tightened its grip on power. It said the Taliban exercise direct control over half of the country's district administrative centers. In Myanmar, security forces have killed 20 people after armed villagers clashed with troops in the Ayeyarwady Delta region. This is the heaviest death toll in nearly 2 months as the army struggles to quell resistance against the coup. Nearly 850 people have been killed in the military crackdown since February the 1st. This comes a day after 2 Southeast Asian envoys met the junta chief in the capital Naypyidaw. The meeting discussed cooperation on humanitarian issues and holding an election. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan says rich countries haven't paid due attention to global warming. He was addressing a ceremony in Islamabad to mark World Environment Day.
This year, Pakistan has been honoured to host World Environment Day in recognition of its efforts to save the ecosystem. At the occasion, Prime Minister Imran Khan urged the developed world to support those countries vulnerable to climate change. Khan also highlighted Pakistan's contributions in tackling the issue.
Pakistan has decided to plant 10 billion trees. The country has already planted 1 billion trees. People must now pay attention to planting trees to save the environment for our future generations.
In a video message, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the degradation of the natural world is undermining the well-being of 3.2 billion people. The United Nations added that sustainable development goals can only be achieved by restoring ecosystem.
Pakistan has condemned the custodial killing of a Kashmiri civilian by Indian occupation forces. In a statement, the Foreign Office said Muhammad Amin Malik was tortured by the troops. It added that Indian troops murder young men and children in broad daylight. Islamabad says the morally bankrupt Indian government even refuses to return the remains of the martyrs for proper burial. The Foreign Office said India cannot suppress the Kashmiri struggle for their right to self-determination. Islamabad has urged the world to hold India accountable for grave rights violations. It called for solving the long-standing dispute according to the UN resolutions. The G7 group of leading economies has reached a historic deal on taxing multinational companies. At a meeting in London, finance ministers agreed to commit to a global minimum tax rate of 15%. The move could see billions of dollars flow to the governments. It will help countries pay off debts incurred during the COVID-19 crisis. UK's Exchequer Chancellor Rishi Sunak says the deal will create a level playing field for global companies. Tech giants such as Amazon and Google could be among the companies affected. In India, COVID-19 has claimed nearly 3,400 lives and infected more than 120,000 people in the past 24 hours. Worldwide, there are more than 3.7 million deaths and 172 million cases. More in this report.
The global race involving coronavirus vaccines and the political controversies surrounding these jabs is only getting tighter every day. China's renowned vaccine developer Chen Wei says a nebulized inhalable vaccine has been approved for expanded clinical trials. Russian President Vladimir Putin claims Europe was slow to approve the Sputnik V vaccine because of a battle for money, and commercial interests were being put ahead of the welfare of European citizens. Argentina and Serbia have begun the industrial production of the Sputnik V jab. Currently, Argentina ranks third highest in the world for average daily cases, with more cases recorded per capita than Brazil.
We are seeing a decrease on average in the age of the people who are dying of the COVID-19. But the majority of the people who are dying are older than 60 years of age. That decrease is thanks to the vaccinations. What we have to do now is to lower the number of the deaths and lower the number of the cases.
Mexico says it will give Johnson & Johnson vaccines supplied by the U.S. to people aged 18 to 40 along the border region. In the U.S., experts say increasing adolescent hospitalizations are a reminder that even children are at risk. Britain's Health Secretary Matt Hancock says vaccinating children in the UK will take priority over donating doses to other countries. Meanwhile, UEFA and Britain are mulling lifting quarantine restrictions on overseas supporters for the knockout stages of Euro 2020 championships. Over in India, the World Food Programme says the Modi government's relief efforts are not enough.
So in that context, this challenge of job loss and loss in employment opportunities and loss in wages has a severe consequence on food and nutrition. So we worry about it very much. And of course, now these 2 months, this announcement by the government is a very positive support and initiative, but probably there will be a need to do these type of things for a longer period, and as well as there might be a need for additional support.
Meanwhile, in Japan, a senior Olympic official has criticized the International Olympic Committee for ignoring public concerns over holding the Tokyo Games during the pandemic.
In Pakistan, 84 people have lost their lives to coronavirus over the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry logs more than 1,900 cases overnight. According to statistics, more than 21,000 people have died since the beginning of the pandemic. The number of confirmed cases has topped 930,000. Meanwhile, more than 860,000 people have recovered so far. Just over 3,400 people are in intensive care units. A total of 8.2 million vaccines have been administered in Pakistan. Israeli forces have injured more than 130 Palestinians in different cities of the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Red Crescent says 23 runners were injured after Israeli police fired tear gas and stun grenades at a protest marathon. It said the race was organized in solidarity with the Palestinians facing forced expulsions in occupied Jerusalem. The run began from Sheikh Jarrah and was to end 3.5 kilometers away in Silwan. There was no immediate comment from the Israeli military. Meanwhile, the number of Palestinians injured in the shooting at an anti-settlements rally in Nablus city has risen to 113. Earlier, Palestine's agricultural ministry said the losses in the recent Israeli military offensive on Gaza stand at $204 million. The US, the UK, France and Germany will not push for a resolution against Iran at a meeting of the UN nuclear watchdog next week. Diplomats said the countries will simply issue statements despite Tehran's failure to explain uranium traces found at 3 sites. A resolution may prompt an escalation between Tehran and the West and jeopardize the Vienna talks. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister says he has agreed with his British counterpart on the need to resume compliance with the 2015 deal. Javad Zarif says the US must stop using sanctions as negotiating leverage. The US says the closure of the final aid crossing into Syria could cause senseless cruelty for millions of Syrians. The US envoy to the UN called on the Security Council to extend permission for cross-border aid delivery. Linda Thomas-Greenfield says Syrians will die without the Bab al-Hawa crossing, the only remaining access point. She said Washington wants the UN to feed starving children, protect homeless families and vaccinate locals. The envoy revealed plans to meet her Russian counterpart and other Security Council members to press for the extended access. The United States says it views the current ransomware attacks as a rising threat and concern to the country's national security. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said U.S. President Joe Biden wishes to raise the concern with his Russian counterpart in Geneva. Psaki added that some of the ransomware hackers were traced back to being of Russian origin. Earlier, Russia's President Vladimir Putin said the U.S. was trying to hold back the developments made by Moscow for the betterment of bilateral ties. Speaking at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, Putin said Russia desires to establish cordial relations with the U.S. but is being held back by Washington. Putin is setting a tough tone for the ties as presidents of both the states are set to meet in Geneva on 16th of June. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized Facebook's decision to ban him for 2 years, calling it an insult to his voters. In a statement, Trump called the 2020 presidential election rigged and that he sees himself making a return to the White House. Earlier, the social media company suspended his Facebook and Instagram accounts for 2 years. This came after Trump posted about the U.S. Capitol riots, which Facebook termed a severe violation of its rules. The company also announced it might reinstate the accounts in January 2023 after re-evaluating its risk to public safety. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. India has told Twitter it has one last chance to comply with new IT rules or face consequences. New Delhi has been coming down hard on Twitter, asking it to block content critical of the Indian government. In February, it sent Twitter a notice of non-compliance that threatened its executives with jail terms of up to 7 years. The new rules also require social media giants to appoint India-based executives to coordinate with the law enforcement agencies. The guidelines have also spurred a legal challenge from WhatsApp, which says the government is exceeding its legal powers. China and Russia pledged to work towards shared interests. In a phone call, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi and Russia's Sergei Lavrov vowed to protect world peace. Wang said the strategic partnership between China and Russia has stood the test of time, whereas Lavrov said Russia supports efforts to synergize the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative. He said the activities held to mark 20 years of Russia-China Treaty of Good Neighborliness will strengthen the friendship. The two sides also decided to expand economic and technical cooperation in pandemic prevention. In Burkina Faso, gunmen have killed around 100 civilians in an attack on a village in the northern Yaga province. In a statement, the government said the attackers burned homes and a market. No group has claimed the responsibility for the attack. 72 hours of national mourning has been declared in the country. The violence in Burkina Faso has displaced more than 1 million people in over 2 years. In Mali, thousands of supporters of the opposition coalition gathered for a rally in Bamako's Independence Square. They marked 1 year since the start of the protests that led to the ouster of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. The long-planned rally was held after coup leader Colonel Assimi Goïta ousted the interim leaders on 24th of May, but the coalition felt slighted after it wasn't consulted and publicly condemned Goïta's seizure of power. Goïta is expected to name opposition leader Choguel Maïga as prime minister, who spearheaded the protests last year. Meanwhile, the World Bank says it will pause payments to operations in Mali after the military seized power. In Sri Lanka, flash floods and mudslides triggered by heavy rains have killed 4 people and left 7 others missing. Officials said rains have been pounding 6 districts of the island since Thursday night. They added that many houses and roads have been inundated, blocking traffic. The weather department said a downpour of 150 millimeters is expected over the weekend. It has urged the public to exercise caution and issued landslides warnings in some districts. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called on the Catholic Church to take the responsibility for its role in the country's residential schools. His statement comes after the recent discovery of the remains of 215 children at a former school for the Indigenous children. Trudeau said that as a Catholic, he is deeply disappointed by the position taken by the Church. He urged the latter to release its records on the schools. Meanwhile, the National Assembly of Bishops in Canada has said that the Catholic Church as a whole was not associated with the residential schools. Between 1831 and 1996, some 150,000 children were forcibly sent to residential schools, where many suffered abuse and even death. The Vice President of Namibia has called out on Germany's offer to pay 1.1 billion euros as a reparation to the colonial-era genocide. Nangolo Mbumba said no amount in any currency can truly compensate for the loss of human life. In a statement, Mbumba said the amount does not address the quantum of reparations initially submitted to the German government. He added that the money cannot pay off Namibians being expelled and killed from their own state. Earlier, in a deal with Namibia, Germany agreed to fund infrastructure projects in the country as a compensation. Germany apologized for its role in the slaughter of Herero and Nama tribespeople in Namibia more than a century ago. In Myanmar, villagers helped 4 stuck wild elephants out of a mud pit by digging them an escape route. Footage shows the elephants trying to climb the steep slope on the side of the pit and make it out. The villagers in the western Rakhine state usually avoid the elephants in the forest, but they feared that the animals would have died if they had stayed trapped in the hole. A rescuer said they saved the elephants because they are at risk of vanishing and part of their state's heritage. The UK has set new rules for companies bidding for the government contracts to commit to net zero emissions by 2050. According to the new rule, the companies will also have to publish their carbon reduction plans to win a bid. Minister for Efficiency and Transformation, Theodore Agnew, said the rule will help a green British economy. Agnew added the UK spends £290 billion on procurement every year, and it is important to float this amount to zero emission. The announcement comes amid the World Environment Day as an attempt to balance carbon emissions to net zero by the UK. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. In Venezuela, members of a ceremonial brotherhood have called for the end to COVID-19 pandemic in the country and the world through a dancing ritual. Details in this report.
Since the 1700s, people in towns along Venezuela's central coast dress as masked devils for a ritual. During the annual Corpus Christi celebration, they surrender to God as part of a symbolic victory of good over evil. The festivity mixes indigenous African and Spanish traditions.
We must ask the most holy sacrament of the altar for disappearance of the pandemic throughout the world. Because what we are experiencing is bad for everyone. So we ask the most holy sacrament with all our heart. We do this so that the tradition never wanes.
Residents play drums for dancers who dressed as horses, dogs, and cats with belts tied to their waists. Authorities permit the festival because the devils wear masks under their decorative costumes and the distancing measures are respected in the ceremony.
We have had difficult times. We have fought with the economic problem. We have fought with the pandemic. We have fought with the political problem, with the social issue, and even like that we continue to pay worship and grace to the most holy sacrament.
UNESCO has declared the dancing devils part of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2012.
Hollywood hosts the first major in-person premiere with a special screening of In the Heights since the COVID-19 pandemic. The screening is part of the Los Angeles Latino International Film Festival. The film will hold its official world premiere next week as part of the Tribeca Film Festival in the site of the movie, Washington Heights. Many of the key cast members, including lead actresses Melissa Barrera and Leslie Grace, were seen at the TCL Chinese Theater to launch the film. The film is the first major Latino Hollywood film in years that shows the dreams and hopes of Latinos living in Washington Heights. The cast, directors and producers are excited for the screening of the film, which has already made flawless reviews of critics with 98% rating.
I'm so happy that we get to actually do this in person, and here with a theater filled with our gente, with Latinos. Hopefully they love it as much as we loved making it.
Now the business updates. Oil prices have surged a record high, with Brent topping $72 a barrel for the first time since 2019. This comes as OPEC Plus supply discipline and recovering demand countered concerns about patchy COVID-19 vaccination rollout around the globe. Earlier this week, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries said they would stick to agreed supply restraints, while a weekly supply report showed U.S. crude inventories dropped more than expected last week. A slowdown in talks over Iran's nuclear program, which reduced expectations of a return of Iranian oil supply, also boosted oil. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now with the latest updates. You can follow us on social media at Indus Special.